And when you negotiated your first Sino-foreign joint venture in 1980, I mean, you made it sound very simple, where the leaders said, do bake bread and do bake good bread, and then the deal got approved. But in reality, there was months and months of negotiations in getting the first approvals from the China government and setting up the joint venture with CAAC. And I was wondering if you could share some of the relationship aspects behind that. And for instance, I know when you first negotiated with CAAC, it was going to be a 50-50 joint venture. And it was at your discretion, I believe, that you allowed them to be 51% and you be 49%. A second aspect of the negotiations was that it was anticipated that you would be bought out or exit the joint venture within 8 years. And I think you're still, 30 years later, part of the joint venture, so obviously that buyout and exit did not occur. So there's a lot of relationship issues here that I suspect we can learn a few things. Would you like to share some backgrounds about your view of how to, not everyone says relationships are important, but I think you can probably give us some examples to substantiate that. Thank you.
I think, Barry, relationship builds on mutual trust and mutual respect. And when I went there in 1979, I could not even speak a word of Putonghua. I think our friends here will speak much better Putonghua than I do. But I have been very interested in history in high school in Hong Kong. So I read Chinese history, European history. Now, the first time when I tried to negotiate just by myself with no lawyers, I was sitting on the bed in the Beijing hotel. My two comrades were sitting on the seat-end chairs. And they told me, well, we'd like to discuss with you. They have 3 other options. One is SAS. One was actually Singapore Airlines. One was Japan Airlines. So they are trying to choose one among the 4 contenders. They told me, well, we are looking for people with money, people with know-how, people with a market, but we want them to leave in 4 years' time. It's a joint venture of 4 years. And now look at Hong Kong. We need to get 5 years to get the return on investment. So I suggested to the 2 comrades, I said, well, why don't we look about 4 plus 4 is 8. It's a lucky number 8 in Hong Kong. So the 5th year, I'll sell 10% to you. 6th, 10%, 7th year, 10%, 8th year, 10%. By the end of the 8 years term is 9%. And I said, well, you better have the ownership right, 51%. We don't mind having 49%. I think in China, when you really explain things in honesty and in really a very open system, they trust you. And they trust you, they believe what you tell them. So it took them 2 days to leave me sitting in the Beijing room, hotel room. No one talked to me. I was sitting there. And then the 3rd day, suddenly I got a call. And they come back to see me again. I said, well, our bosses, our leaders accepted 8 years instead of 4 years. That's how I got my first joint venture. And I was the only negotiator. I have no lawyers, I have no accountants. And then when I told my father it's 8 years, he said, okay, let's go for take 8 years. Then after we started the 2 years, in 1982, we started to say, well, you need us to build another project. By that time, we have to finance capital gain. So why don't we set up for another 15 years? So from 8 years, we have 15 years. And then when Olympics started to be on stream, we were told to build the 3rd terminal flight kitchen. So we said, well, we have to spend another 400 million RMB. So why don't we negotiate for another 20 years? That's how from 8 plus 15 plus 20. In China, you have to do additions and do things one step at a time. And I think I always remember Deng Xiaoping's words, feeling the stones when you cross the river. Don't jump because you'll slip into the river. And relationship and guidance is built on long-term relationship. It's not just overnight. Thank you.
Thank you. You're talking about being in a room for 2 days all alone in China. That would be a very tough experience. I also remember another anecdote that you had shared previously is that when you were traveling up to Wuhan, I think in the late 1970s, you would have to bring your own soap and your own toilet paper while traveling in China. So it's not easy is the message there. Vincent, I have a question from you, and it's actually very similar to one I wanted to ask, and it's about the attitudes towards brands in China. So this is not more of a lifestyle question than a real estate or a construction question. And We all know that the very rich, conspicuous consumption, the XO, the brandies, the expensive cars are very common. But I find amongst the middle class in China that they can be very frugal. Saving is important, and spending money in a conspicuous way is not admired. And then now we have the youth today, the younger people who are starting to get jobs after university. And what is your attitude to them? Are brands important to them? Is conspicuous consumption important to the young professionals in their 20s and 30s? Or is the traditional concepts of saving money and frugality important? Can you comment on that, please?
Brand is definitely very important. We do have quite a useful brand in China because our properties are selling at 20-30% premium to the market. But of course, we do try to give them the top quality and the service. But then again, I think brand is going to be something that people who are interested in China in the long term should invest into. And it's not easy to build up a brand. China, it's not one market. It's hundreds of different markets. And one must take note of that because every city is so different. But of course, in the first-tier cities like Beijing and Shanghai, they usually lead the way. So for us to do the Xintiandi project, all over China, they come knocking on our door. And we have built up that brand, and we will continue to work on it for sure. Barry, you asked about the younger generation, whether they want to spend money. Definitely, because they know how to appreciate life and enjoy life nowadays, right? The internet is available to them, so they know how people live overseas. And like in Xintiandi, I often ask my staff, can you afford to go to Xintiandi? They said, no, we always have to wait for the paycheck, and then we go, and then we have to wait for a few weeks. I guess they're looking for a raise from me. But they do know how to spend money for sure, because I guess, it's only human nature. And when the social security is in place, I believe the domestic consumption in China is going to be tremendous. It's growing in a very healthy mid-teens every year. But I believe it will go a lot higher in the future.
Well, part of the issue with the world financial crisis is that Westerners were not saving money. They were spending money beyond their needs, and particularly taking on debt with household mortgages. So with this younger class in China, as their incomes accumulate, professionals, for instance, will they be saving money, or will they be spending all their money, do you think?
They do save money, but they don't put it in the bank only. Chinese people have a very good hobby. They all love to make money. So making money is a favorite pastime. So I'm not worried about the young people.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you. You see that with the stars, there is a constant theme here of making money.
Excuse me, I'd like to add something on the branding thing. I think branding is an interesting topic. It's the same kind of product. If it's branded right, you can sell a lot more. And China is at the edge of developing. It's a free-for-all in establishing yourself as a good brand. Now, I noticed also some successes and failures. Case in point, General Motors spent a lot of time. Were able to make Cadillac the top brand. But then in the 70s, they put a Chevy chassis on the Cadillac. And you see the demise of the Cadillac. Why the hell people will want to pay extra money on a Chevy chassis? So this is something that is very important. If you get there, don't forget, you are there because you extinguish yourself. And you can't fool the people all the time.
With brands, Sir Gordon, I would imagine we're going to see a strengthening of Chinese brands as opposed to the international brands. But international brands will always stay important. How do you see the development of China brands, and will those brands be marketed around the world? Made in China, effectively, brands.
Already, if you walk into any supermarket, any department store in China, made in China is the probably over 60% of it, if not larger. I'm sure in due course that the Chinese brands will be recognized. And the jury, frankly, I think is still out. But it won't surprise me 10 years from now that might be some of the top brands of any category would be Chinese made, provided they adhere to that you sell products to people that has validity, that has quality, and charge reasonable price. And if you can achieve all that, I think your brand can be very successful.
Good, that's interesting. Now I've got a question from the audience from you, Sir Gordon. And I know that you said it's difficult to predict the future even beyond 2 days earlier. But this question may be a bit more concrete. And it's regarding the Hong Kong, Shenzhen, Guangzhou Express Rail Link. The Hong Kong, Shenzhen, Guangzhou Express Rail Link. How do you expect the whole region to change? I believe that's expected to be in operation by the year 2016. What will it do for Hong Kong in particular, and what will it do for Guangdong?
Well, you got to look at the big picture. What has China done, or what is China doing at the present moment? One of their top priorities, national priorities at the present moment, is to build the equivalent of the Shinkansen, the bullet train of Japan, like the TGV of the France and of the French, and also the intercity express of Germany. Very fast trains, 360 kilometers an hour. I rode on the Beijing to Tianjin Express, and it took me only 28 minutes to cover that 120 kilometers. And if Hong Kong, which is at the southern end of it, don't connect to that, we are probably shooting ourselves in the foot. And having said that, so how do we go about it? Unfortunately for the Hong Kong government, they don't seem to understand that this too much. For all these years, you ride the train from Guangzhou, go to Hong Kong, and they stop in the middle of nowhere. There's no other interlink. And I remember 25 years ago, I raised that question with Governor Patton. I said, why the hell don't you shoot that Hong Kong station thing to Victoria Park and connect with Hong Kong's? Because it does give Hong Kong people, 1 million people, and the town center much better access. And also, this track can also serve to divert some congestion from having relying on the MTR and the Central District. Of course, when the consultants say, well, yeah, we want to do that, maybe 50 years from now, the thing dies. So it's very important. If Hong Kong wants to survive, it's got to be connected to these 1.3 billion people, because this is our future.
Well said. I have another question for you, Sir Gordon. I was asked by the TDC to ask this one next, so it's a priority question. It comes from Seattle, Washington, which is my neighbor 2 hours away from where I live, so I will treat this with respect. And this is a question that's probably on the minds of the Chinese leaders every day, and it's the growing gap between the wealth of the rich and the poor in China. In other words, the poor are still very poor. If this gap continues to grow, what's your prediction of the impact on China and Hong Kong in the next 10 years?
Well, throughout history, there has been a lot of movements for or against trying to make everybody equal. It started probably with the French Revolution, when they talk about equality and fraternity and liberty. And the Paris Commune was the result. At the end of the day, everybody was equal, all right, but unfortunately equally poor. And it was the same with the 1958 Mao Zedong experiment on the communes. And again, everybody was equally poor. You see, there's a distinction between the production of wealth and the distribution of wealth. I think communism concentrates on the distribution of wealth, and they forget about creating it. Capitalism, on the other hand, did all the production part, but forget about the distribution. The modern day is a hybrid, so that like Hong Kong, like Singapore, like everybody, most of the places, they let you make as much money as you can. But there's a very friendly organization in America, for instance, the Internal Revenue Service. Come April 15th, and they say, well, you tell me how much you have made, and my share of it, and use that money. They didn't use it too wisely. They spent $2 trillion in Iraq and Afghanistan. And now Wen Jiabao is having the same problem, but he's much smarter. He also has internal revenue service, but he took the money, and you look at how he spent it. He waived all taxation from the farmers, and this is one bit to sort of try to level the playing field. Well, you can't have everything equal, because if you try to make it equal, then everybody will be equally poor. And I think China will be doing a lot to try to make the gap much narrower. But at the same time, the important thing is don't stop the entrepreneurs, don't stop the companies, don't stop the individuals to have the incentive to create wealth. After all, you've got to create it. And if you can create it, then worry about distributing it.
One second. That was interesting. I have to confess, I didn't know where you were going when you were talking about the IRS in the United States, but you brought that back nicely back into China and the taxation of farmers and the relief providers. So that was a very, very thoughtful answer. Vincent, comments?
Well, Barry, I just want to add a comment here. The disparity of wealth is definitely very serious in China, but it's the poor people, mainly from the rural area, the agricultural sector. And I believe certain reforms are being considered whereby the farms can be converted. And if that is going to happen, I guess the farmers are going to be fairly rich people.
In the last 30 years, what I've seen in China, a tremendous migration from the rural area into the city. And that is something, that's where Vincent here is making a lot of money on real estate. Because when they move, well, if you can spot it, you're going to make some fortune too. There's also another migration, which is the migration of state-owned enterprises into private sector enterprises. When I first went in, 99% was public sector, owned by public sector. I think now it's less than half, and it's going to grow less. So Wen Jiabao actually has got a lot of things up his sleeve. What he can always do is just sell a lot more of the state-owned enterprises and have the money. Now there's also another funny way. I thought it was funny because the individual provinces collect the tax, and at the end of every year they negotiate with the central government how much money is kept by the local and how much money is given to Wen Jiabao. And I remember at that time, I was kidding with Premier Zhao Ziyang. I said, this is a unique, funny system. And he said, no, the Romans had the same system. And it was right. I look at it in the history books. The Romans had the same system. So this is how China works. Tibet, poor country. Okay, poor province. You get the money. Shanghai, very rich. You contribute more.
Okay, we've talked about farmers on the ground. Now let's talk about people in the air. Dr. Wu, the current and future of China's national airline industry and outbound travel. This is from a question from Denmark, by the way, in Europe. Where do you see the Chinese airline industry moving towards? More travel in Asia, more travel in the West, or more travel domestically? You've catered 20 million airline meals last year, so I think you're an expert on the airline industry.
Well, we cater to the travelers in the airlines. So basically, if I observe the development of the airline industry in China for the last 31 years, they have now become what we call aviation groups. That means, for example, like Air China is listed on the stock market in New York, is listed in Hong Kong. They are actually becoming state-owned enterprises, but with I would say with a Hong Kong market economy touch. And looking down the road in future, the aviation industry in China is both. It's domestic and international. So normally for long-haul flights, the first airline to take that priority normally is Air China because of the airplane they have. And the next one maybe is China Southern, because China Southern using Guangzhou as a hub, it goes a lot to the Middle East, goes to Africa, goes to part of Europe. And China Eastern now, because it's restructuring, is going to merge with the Shanghai Airlines. It's going eventually to serve mainly partly in the domestic market, partly maybe with, I would say, in Asia, 1 or 2 flights to North America. But eventually, all the airlines development has to be controlled by the State Council under the Guokjiwei, the Department of Controlling State-Owned Assets. So it's a planned economy for the airlines. Of course, they have to justify their development to the shareholders. And one thing I feel looking at the domestic market in the future is because of the development of the high-speed TVG trains, most of the airlines will not be flying, say, from Shanghai to Hangzhou to Suzhou, other places. They will be taking the TVG trains. So the domestic market will be more catered to business hubs for businessmen to travel. And we are seeing a diminishing segment of the government officials traveling on airlines now.
I'm sure Annie will be thinking about catering for the fast trains, because that number of meals served will be much more than the airline business.
Mr. McDonald, can I ask it on the floor, please? I'm here. I'm up here. Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
I'm up here.
Okay.
Can I ask it on the floor, please?
Okay.
Thank you. Sam Wong from Australia. Sir Gordon, you look as youthful as I see you 5 years ago, and congratulations for your 74th anniversary. As usual, Hong Kong need people like you for a long, long time. If I make a very quick comment about you mentioned about the rule of laws, especially making an example of Zhu Puiheng, which is a classmate of mine many years ago. I think he did not done anything wrong. Rather than he actually resigned at the end, the Public Service Commission in Hong Kong does not find him in any form of bad behavior or misconduct. And this is, I think, right. The other interesting comment you make regarding the protests regarding the residents in among the highway or the speed train building from Hong Kong to China. I thought this is the demonstrations of the rule of laws of Hong Kong of the Bill of Rights about people who have the rights to dispute in case of their compensation and so on. This is a welcoming thing. The rest of the world look at us. Maybe it's not very good for enterprise development rather than a balance of the civil society. Your comment, please.
Well, let me start with the last bit. Yes, I support that. Everybody should have a right to appeal to protest. But why occupy or try to occupy the government compound? Because you can do it all day Sunday. Come Monday, then there's got to be work done. We paid a lot of money to our civil servants to make the government working. I'm a taxpayer. I'm sure you're a taxpayer too. So if we let a small group of people disrupt the functioning of government just because they want to do so, and I think this is not the rule of law. It becomes a mob rule, and this is not right. Now, on the first bit, yes, Mr. Zhu Puiheng, he had a night out. He has a good time. There's nothing wrong with that. But on the other hand, he was really, for the next couple of weeks after the episode, every day he was bombarded by the newspaper. And I saw that the Democratic camp, it's only after the initial week or so, then everything died down. Inequality.
Thanks, Sir Gordon. I also want to come back very briefly to finish the question from Annie Wu. And Sir Gordon very wisely said that, there's a lot of money in addition to airline catering, including trains and other things. And I think it's important to note that Annie is not just an airline caterer. I believe that many of the trains in China, such as the Beijing-Tibet, the new high-speed train that you provide catering on it, and her family is the Maxim's group of restaurants in Hong Kong, which is probably the largest restaurant operator. Everyone's had a meal.
And a brand name too.
Pardon me?
And a brand name.
And a brand name. I thank you. And a very good brand name, including all the gardens: Jade Garden, Hunan Garden, Shanghai Garden, Peking Garden. So everybody's had a meal in one of Annie's restaurants, whether you know it or not. Vincent, I had a question written down from the audience, and it goes very similar to the question I asked Annie at the beginning about relationships. as I jokingly said, you're referred to as the king of Guangxi in China, and in real estate development projects, relationships are obviously very key with other investors and with the government. But the question is more directed to, we all know relationships are important. We all know that. And in fact, they're important in our own cultures, but even more so when doing business in China. Can you give an example of a piece of advice that you would give to a foreigner? Like we're overseas businessmen and women. When we come to Hong Kong, we all know relationships, but we actually don't necessarily know how to carry that out on a day-to-day basis. Can you give us some specific advice about how to build a good relationship?
I'm actually quite surprised that one of the magazines would call me the king of Guangxi, because I hardly ever entertain the officials. I just don't like to socialize like that. I believe the best form of Guangxi is performance. Always keep your promise. When you deliver on your promise, you will have good relationship.
There we go. And keeping your word, right? And delivering. We have maybe about 2 minutes left, so I thought I would just see if anybody in the audience, we have a couple of roving microphones. Anybody in the audience have a question they would like to ask verbally? I'll give you a few seconds to think about that. I'll ask one more question, and then I'll turn it back and see if anybody from the floor has a question. Sir Gordon, during your long career, what would you say is your most successful project, but not in terms of making money, but in terms of personal satisfaction? Although I guess those could be both the same. Your most successful project in terms of personal satisfaction?
It's probably the Shenzhen-Guangzhou Expressway, that toll highway. I remember when I first went in and talked about this concept, and the Chinese authorities, including the premier, he didn't doubt me, but he said, is this at the right time? Because we couldn't even afford bicycles at that time. But what I saw was the convenience of door-to-door travel. I witnessed Eisenhower's interstate defense highway system, which was established in 1956. I was a junior at that time. My reaction at that time was, okay, I can get a job in America. Because then with the building of the highway system, a civil engineer will not be unemployed. But when I found out the tax bracket of the IRS, I took the first flight home. So what was proposing at that time was something, people really thought most of the people in China thought I was a loony. Why the hell you want to build something that people cannot afford? Yeah. But look at China today. They got nearly 40,000 kilometers of superhighway, second in the world, only smaller than the interstate system. And without that, then there's no way China can move forward. It's the same that the high-speed train system in China, they are going to reap a lot of benefit. Actually, in America, they should build something like this from Boston, Providence, and New Haven, New York, and down to Washington, Wilmington, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Wilmington, all the way down to Richmond. But look at the lobbies of the airline industries and the automobile industry. They will stop that. So I don't think in the next 20 years they will be able to do that. But in terms of energy saving, in terms of speed, efficiency, that's what America should be doing. Something, a fast train, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. This is something that the American forefathers were able to do in the 19th century, with the land grants and all that. And yet, in the 21st century, they forget about what their grandfather was able to do, which is a very sad story. So to Americans, I would advise, go and write to your congressman and say, look, America got to pick yourself up because other people are catching up.
Hey. There's a Thanksgiving message for our Americans. And I suspect you've noticed a fairly constant theme in Sir Gordon's comments about the IRS and taxes.
To me, that's a local chapter of the Communist Party.
For those overseas visitors that may not be up to date on the latest business readings in Hong Kong, the IRS announced in the past few months that they are targeting Hong Kong companies as they view Americans are using them for tax evasion. So that's part of the diatribe against the IRS here. We have time for one more question from the floor, if there is a question from the floor.
Yes, hello. I would like to. And I'm Peter from Denmark, and that is we are in the property development industry for the entertainment sector in China. And since you have some great knowledge in it, if you could share a little bit on your future predictions in the industry.
Future predictions on the entertainment business. I think that's Gordon's expertise. No, I think the young people in China is just like young people from the West. They would enjoy life, but of course, I think the Chinese culture and upbringing is much more reserved. So I don't think we expect to see too much wild behaviors, but they do want to go out and enjoy. Definitely, in the Xintiandi area, every night we see young people just staying, till dawn almost. It's the same over the world. You should know.
Excellent. 3 stars, a fantastic morning. Let's have a big round of applause and thank you.